Hey guys, hey, Dr. Jerry here with Mills Chiropractic and Wellness Center. And in this webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what's happening with technology and specifically what's going on up inside of the brain as we interact with technology and we spend more time in technology. So it, this is such a hard thing to kind of try to break down into just a couple of minutes. It's like trying to explain all of neuroscience in a couple of moments, but I'm going to try to do that. I'm not going to be extremely scientifically accurate. Please understand that this is far more complicated. Good enough to try to explain it in some simple terms. But when we interact with technology, basically we're interacting through our visual system, right? It's how we're experiencing the world is solely through our visual system. Now, this is very unnatural for us as humans. Normally we experience our environment through vision, through smell, through sound, through touch, through movement, through just a variety of means. But when we're interacting with technology, primarily we're doing it through vision and some through hearing. But the biggest piece of it is primarily through vision. And so as we interact with that technology, of course, it goes through our eyes, but it goes all the way to the back of our head, into the occipital lobe, and it stimulates this part of the brain. And when we talk about brain, one of the simple ways to kind of think about it is to think of the brain as a muscle. The more we use a part, the bigger it gets. The less we use a part, the smaller it tends to get, right? And so normally when we're interacting with our world, we're stimulating all these different parts of the brain and we're stimulating them somewhat equally through different functions. But when we're interacting with technology, we're not doing that natural total brain light up. We're really lighting up one portion of the brain. And the area of the brain that really tends to take the biggest hit is actually up in our prefrontal cortex. So this part right up front here. Our prefrontal cortex is basically what gives us executive function. It's what allows us to think through problems, to use logic, to understand good choices versus bad choices, and to weigh the consequences of those choices. We also stimulate the prefrontal cortex primarily through movement. And that's one of the big things that we're going to talk about as we move through this is it's not just what the technology is doing, but it's what we're not doing while we're experimenting or interacting with technology. And so most of the time we're not moving, so we're not really stimulating this prefrontal cortex. A lot of times we're not really thinking through problem solving a lot. We have access to the technology that can find us an answer real quickly, right? We don't have to think about it. We just Google it. Oh, there's the answer, right? And so basically it's turning off some of these executive functions. And so, a simple way of kind of thinking about it is we're making the back part of our brain really strong, but we're weakening this front part. And one of the big concerns that I personally have is that we really have brain development. We have neuroplasticity. Our brains are changing all the time. That's a great, wonderful, fascinating thing to kind of study and to get into. But there are really two times in our life where our brain changes very rapidly. And that's when we're from 0 to 3 years old, but also when we're in our teen years, our brains are changing very rapidly. And so one of the things that we're discovering and that we're starting to learn is that, we're playing a really big experiment on our children during brain development is how is this brain development thing, how's that going to impact them long term? And as we go through this, I think most of us are going to agree, well, first of all, we don't know. But second of all, what we do know at this point is that it's probably not going to be a real good thing. That's why we're seeing some of these dementia-like symptoms, right? The inability to concentrate, the inability to focus, the inability to pay attention, inability to know how to interact in situations, the inability to know how to cognitive rationalize, come to good choices for simple things as far as even what we're putting in our mouth, what we're eating while we're interacting with the technology, right? And it really kind of pushes us down just from a brain development standpoint or a brain processing standpoint. This is basically what makes us human. This is where we think and rationalize. But when we don't stimulate that, and we're stimulating lower parts of our brain, we tend to act more like animals. So, I always kind of think of this when I watch my kids, if they've had a period where, they've interacted with technology. I hate to throw my mom under the bus, but my mom lets the kids have a lot of technology. And we've talked about it, and I'm continuing to educate. And I'm hoping, Mom, I'm hoping you're going to watch these webinars so you can understand why we have these discussions, right? But when we're stimulating our kids, and I can see it in my kids all the time because they just don't get a whole lot of technology at home. Again, I'm not saying technology is bad. We just need to, make sure we're using it for the right reason at the right time at the appropriate age, right? But especially as they were younger, and I still see it in them now, but when they interact with technology a lot, you can really see that their logic centers are fried. They're not using them. They don't know how to behave. They don't know how to interact. And they're really in this lower brain level of lower brain levels, anger, hunger, reproduction. Those are the things that those lower brain. Now, luckily, they're not thinking about the last one, right? But adults and my concern with teenagers is those are the brain levels that are being stimulated, right? And so there are some real concerns because I see that behavior in my own kids, and they just can't rationalize their thoughts and their actions after they've had a big interaction with technology. So anyway, that's a little bit of the neuroanatomy that we're going to be talking about. But I want you to keep remembering that we're stimulating the back part, we're weakening the front part, we're refusing to exercise this, we're strengthening this back here, which is where a lot of our lower brain centers live, and we tend to think at lower levels. We're like an animal, right? Less like a human. And so, anyway, that's one of the pieces that we know is occurring with this digital dementia. So, until next time, stay healthy, stay well.